welcome to the University of Law's podcast. The next episode of the Diversity Matters series is all about disability support. I'm Sophie and I'm part of the marketing events team here at the university, and it's my absolute pleasure to co-host this podcast with my good friend and colleague, Cara.
Thank you, Sophie. Hi, I'm Cara, a brand content executive here at the University of Law. Today, we're delighted to be joined by Jen Harley. Jen, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your role.
Hi, yes, thank you for your very warm welcome. My name's Jen Harley and I'm project managing disability inclusion across the University of Law at the moment. I've got 15 years worth of experience in education. I've formerly taught in secondary schools. I've also taught in further education, and I've been in the higher education section for 7 years.
Perfect. Well, lovely to hear from you, Jen, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you. So, as we say, today's podcast is about disabilities, and I think a good place to start would be to understand what we mean when referring to disabilities here at the University of Law. So, Jen, as our project manager for disability inclusion and a huge advocate for students and staff, could you help us define this, please?
Of course. So being the University of Law, I'm going to start with the legal definition of disability. So it's looking at a condition that has more than a trivial impact or a substantial impact on your day-to-day activities that's going to last for a long period of time. By long, the law means 12 months. So if you have something that impacts on your day-to-day abilities to engage with studying environment, the work environment, or the environment outside of your home, or even in your home, and it's going to last for more than 12 months, you would be defined as legally disabled, which means that you would have protections under the Equality Act from direct discrimination, indirect discrimination, and disability discrimination. But that's just sort of the legal definition. But at ULaw, we apply this really quite broadly to make sure that students are supported. So we look at it more through supporting students in reaching their goals, so supporting your success, rather than just the legal definition. So, for example, we also support students who are pregnant, and we also support those students during their postnatal time. You might be a carer for a disabled relative. We can also provide support for you too. And as well as visible disabilities, we also provide a lot of support for hidden disabilities. So that could be something like a neurodiverse condition, like dyslexia, autism, ADHD, or it could be for a mental health condition. So we offer a lot of support for a variety of students, including medical conditions that are ongoing. So if that resonates with you, please do get in touch with us, and we can explain to you what we can do to ensure that your time at the University of Law is as smooth as possible and that you get the most out of your studies while feeling supported and cared for.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for explaining that, because I think some people aren't fully aware that it's not just ongoing permanent disability, so it's useful to know that it's temporary as well.
Absolutely.
One of the things I think our students will also all go through is the changes between coming from school to college and university and how the terminology changes. Could you talk us through a little bit about the changes they'll come across and the words that they'll find really useful to understand before they come to see you?
Yes, so while it's an exciting time applying for university, whether you're moving up from secondary school or from a further education college, there's a lot of forms to fill in and a whole new environment to navigate around. And that includes different terms that we use to describe people. So, for example, in college and secondary school, you're likely to come across the expression SEND, or special educational needs and disability. It's not really a term that we use in universities because at that point you've become adults, so we use the kind of more adult term of disability. Special educational needs is usually only used in what we call a compulsory educational setting. So when you search the website, if you're looking for special educational needs, nothing's going to come up. But if you look for disability, you're going to see a really lovely webpage with lots of information that will help you. And it might seem a little bit unfamiliar for you at the moment because it's a new term, but it's quite a broad term that we use, as I've explained, to look at sort of physical, mental, or sensory impairments that can have an impact on your daily life. So it's worth having a look and seeing what we've got around that area. When it comes to the department that you previously might have been engaged with, it could be called a SEND department, might be additional learning support or a learning support team. We at the University of Law specifically use the Disability and Inclusion Service. So that's a specialist department, and what they do is they set up your support for teaching and learning and assessments as well, and they can help you apply for disabled students allowance. But we're going to come back to that in a little while. Previously, you probably had a special educational needs coordinator or maybe a learning support coordinator or something similar. At the University of Law, we use the terminology disability advisors. So that would be a very similar sort of person. They're a central specialist at the University of Law, and they provide your support. And you'll be allocated an individual advisor based on which campus you're located at. So you'll be able to have, unless they're on holiday, a single point of contact. So someone who'll be able to get to know you during your time. That service is provided remotely to all of our campuses. We also have disability liaison officers who are based at each campus. So you have somebody that you can meet face to face if you wanted to have a chat about anything around supporting your needs. You also might have had, while you were at school or college, possibly an education, health and care plan, sometimes known as an EHCP. You might have had a statement of needs or a pupil passport. So a variety of different names you might have come across. At the University of Law, what we do is call those documents University of Law inclusion plans. We usually call them ULIPs for short, so rhymes with tulips, makes you think of nice things. But essentially, this is very similar to a statement. What it does is sets out your adjustments and needs for teaching and learning and assessments. And if you've applied for disabled students allowance, you will also receive an independent needs assessment report, which is really quite detailed and a very useful document as part of that application process. So slightly different terminology, but ultimately very similar services, but more suitable for the university environment. So if any of that resonates with you, please do get in touch as soon as possible.
That's great. And you've mentioned about sort of support being available at the university. And something that came up following a webinar by the Student Room said that only 53% of students disclose mental health issues to their university. And this can be for a number of reasons, sort of including fear that they'll be refused a place to study, a fear of judgment or treatment, or a lack of understanding of the benefits sort of disclosed. Can you sort of elaborate on this and maybe touch upon some of the services that we do have available?
Yes, of course. 53% of a sharing of a mental health condition seems to be quite low given the prevalence that we know, particularly among a young person's group. And there are many reasons why students feel that they don't wish to share that information, but I want to reassure you that sharing that information with your university will not impact on you being made an offer, and all it will do is enable you access to services to make sure that your time at university is as successful as possible and that you get the support that you need. So I do understand that there's still fear and stigma around disclosing a mental health condition, but we are a lovely specialist service. We're really friendly and want to support you. So do reach out and we will be able to help. So in terms of services specifically around mental health, we have a number of mental health specialists within the Disability and Inclusion Service, and we also have specialist mental health advisors too. We also offer a counselling service, which is available to all students and staff as well, called Spectrum Life, and that is an online counselling platform. All students have the ability to access initially 6 sessions, and depending on how it's going with your counsellor, they can also recommend further sessions with you. And it's completely free and it's very quick to access. So, perhaps if you're on a waiting list already with services outside of the university, this might be a really good option to get that support that you need very quickly. The University of Law is also working on the Students' Mental Health Charter. So we're looking at making sure that students' mental health is embedded and their wellbeing into all of the areas of the work that we do for students. And one of the things that the Disability and Inclusion Service has run last year, we're going to be running again this year, is a transition programme that we call Step U Law, which It's a very short acronym for Successful Transition into Educational Programme for the University of Law. And we do have discrete sessions within those sessions, which will be the week before induction. So keep an eye out for your timetable on how to manage your transition into university, which again is an exciting time, but also there's a lot of things going on if you have a mental health condition to support your mental well-being and, of course, your success and enjoyment of joining the University of Law.
Another interesting stat that we came across is that only 37 or approximately 37% of students apply for disability support allowance, otherwise known as DSA. What do you think about this, and what more can be done to help students access the allowance?
Yes, that again is a woefully low statistic for such a wonderful, supportive and completely free allowance for students with disabilities or previously SEND. So it's available to all UK-based students, and you will be able to make an application. You can do it online now. There is also a form if you wish to, and you need to fill in some information about yourself, the nature of your condition. They will ask you to provide what we call medical evidence at university. So it's like a confirmation, perhaps if you have a medical condition from your doctor, or if you have a neurodiverse condition such as dyslexia from an educational psychologist, and they will then assess you looking at specifically the impact in the study environment and make recommendations. And all of this is completely free. What's commonly offered is specialist study skills. They also have specialist mentors. You can also have library support, physical support getting around the building. If you have a visual impairment, that might include a sighted guide. If you have a hearing impairment, it might include sign language or looking at closed captions or transcriptions. So lots of different things that can enable you to do your very best and get the most enjoyment out of coming to university. And it's all free. Frequently, what's also recommended is a laptop. And I do know that sometimes people see that the laptop costs £200. It's what's called a contribution fee to disabled students allowance. But I just want to reassure you that it actually is free, because the University of Law has a fund where any student who's received a recommendation for that laptop, we will pay the £200 either directly to your supplier or into your bank account so that you can pay that. Therefore, it is completely free. So I would very much encourage students to do that. We have a really helpful video, just like a short summary on the disability and inclusion section of the ULaw website. Have a little watch of that. And there's also a timeline so you can understand where you need to apply. And even if you decide that you're not coming to the University of Law, you can still apply for disabled students allowance regardless of which university you go to, because the allowance follows you rather than your university. So if you've made an application somewhere and you find yourself coming to ULaw unexpectedly through clearing, for example, your disabled students allowance would still follow you and be valid. So it's really important to apply as early as possible. For undergraduates, disabled students allowance opens up usually around about March time. It's currently open, so if you haven't done it, do it now if you're planning to come in September. And for postgraduates, it usually opens up around about sort of mid-May time, sometimes towards the beginning of May. So if you're a postgraduate student, you should be able to do that application now. Just because it takes quite a long time, I would suggest doing it as soon as possible. It can take up to 16 weeks from your initial application to meeting with the needs assessment to look at the impact, to then having the recommendations, to being told which supplier, which is like which company you're going to be getting your laptop or your support from, to then actually ordering that and then receiving the laptop. And you want that all to have happened before you start on day one. So hopefully that was helpful, but do have a look at the disability and inclusion section of the ULaw website for a much briefer video than I've just given you.
No, that's really interesting. And as someone who was diagnosed as such, I guess, with having dyslexia and all of the branches off of that at a lot later age, I actually sort of found out when I was going into college. But when I went to university, as you say, Jen, I actually got this support. And thinking about it, I don't even recall if I remember it being called this. So it's actually quite interesting for me to find out as well. But no, I got some of this support in terms of, it was a lot further than what was given at college. So, at college, it was just extra time in an exam, for example. But at university, I was one of those students that received, a laptop, and I received a printer. I received a machine that sort of converted a textbook into an audio file for me, a dictaphone. So again, when I'm in class, I could just concentrate on trying to take in and absorb what's going on rather than jotting down 10,000 notes, because I couldn't sort of decipher what is important and what's not in terms of a conversation of what my lecturer would be saying. So I think it's really interesting to sort of hear the support and that can be available. And as I say, again, it comes and loops back around to that sort of terminology. As I say, I don't recall knowing that it was called that. And for people that do sort of get diagnosed or find out later on in their educational journey, is it something that they can apply for at any point? And when they do apply, in particular, again, for me, looping back to my dyslexia, I find forms and documents really intimidating. So is there support, as you say? You mentioned that there is, but in terms of like completing the forms, etc., like that, say you're started your journey already at university and you do find out later on that you can benefit from this extra support, is that available?
Yes, absolutely, it remains available. So for each academic year, if you're doing a one-year course, something about our postgraduates, if you start in September, you needed to have applied by the April, because the course finishes 2 months after that. For undergraduates, you can apply any time up until your final year in that April. And I would highly recommend you do if you receive a new diagnosis. And in terms of support for completing the form, which I fully appreciate is daunting, I remember doing my disabled students allowance, and it was still the paper form, so you couldn't do it online. It's much better now, it's online. And it seemed like a really daunting form to fill in, but I felt very happy at the end, because once I'd received it and had my impact assessment, I was able to receive study skills support with a one-to-one tutor who was a specialist in ADHD, which is the condition I have. And I found that really, really useful. And just to sort of echo what Sophie said is, there's the technological support that's available, but there's also that sort of human one-to-one support. And I don't think that I would have been able to finish my master's dissertation without the support of my specialist study skills tutor. Her name was Monica, and she was very lovely. And we're still in touch. So you can also sort of develop lovely relationships. But in terms of actually completing the form, the Disability and Inclusion Service offers what's called a check and send service. So if you are doing the more paper-based form, what you can do is send a copy of that over, and the disability service will, actually it's the lovely Katie and Marietta from the service will help you just make sure everything is completed, because it's quite a long form. Double check that you've got kind of the medical evidence attached. They'll put it all together as one document, and they will email it directly to Disabled Students Allowance for you and copy you in, so you've got it for your records. So that way it means the form's going to go in complete, there'll be nothing missed off, everything will go together, and it just takes away some of that additional administration that can be off-putting, especially at the beginning of the course when you've got lots to organise, like accommodation, how you're going to get there, making sure you can get onto Elite and all the other things that you need to do. So do use that check and send service. As soon as you receive your offer for your place, you will start getting contact from the Disability and Inclusion Service inviting you to register. Once you start getting those emails, do it as soon as possible, because then they can help you with your disabled students application, allowance application, and make sure that everything is nice and set up for when you start, so you can focus on enjoying your new environment.
Lovely, thank you so much. And one other thing I was going to ask you is, from students with a disability or potentially need more support, is there anything specific you'd say when they're looking to choose a university they should be keeping an eye out for, questions that they should raise really on to make sure that university supports them the way they need?
Yes, absolutely. Have a little think about what it is you're looking for from a university sort of environment perspective, because each university is unique. But there are some sort of general questions that you can ask if you're going maybe to an open day or if you're doing a campus tour. So some things that you can think about is, if this is relevant for you, is kind of making sure that there be lift access to your classes or that they be scheduled on a ground floor. What kind of assistive technology is available to all students? So, for example, at the University of Law, we have what's called Claro, which has a variety of very useful tools available for all students, that's networked across our systems and also available on an app. So it can capture audio note, it has mind mapping software, it can read out text to you, it can change the colour of your background on your screen, so like having an overlay on your screen. It has a speaking calculator and a variety of other different aspects that's really good. All of our students have access to Microsoft 365, which includes Dictate software, which I personally love and use every day. So you can, you probably have on your phone, but you can dictate into Word documents. So it's great if you're taking notes or writing up what's happened in a workshop. It can be really useful. And inbuilt into that is Immersive Reader, which reads out documents to you, and you can change the colour of the background to make it more visually appealing and sort of less difficult with the contrast, which is quite nice. I do have a little video series on how to use these. So if you join the University of Law, once you log into our virtual learning environment, there will be a section where you can watch little quick how-to videos. So anyone can have a look at that. You might want to think about things like quiet spaces. So if you're on campus, are there places that you can go that are designated as quiet, other than the library? And looking at kind of the support that's available from your disability and inclusion service. You probably also want to make sure that you're familiar with the course structure. So kind of what your assessments are going to look like, what kind of teaching and learning are you going to be doing? Each environment and each subject is taught in a different way, and just to make sure that that really works for how you prefer to learn and what really works for you. So I think that's quite important to explore that at open days. But also, whenever you're applying for a university, do check out their website and have a look at their disability and inclusion section, or sometimes it's disability support, sometimes it's called accessibility. But do have a look over there to find out what are their statements, what kind of ethos are you feeling. And another thing that can be very useful is there is a lot of paperwork, and while it can be exciting and fun to come to university, it's normal to feel some kind of trepidation. It's a big change, and some universities, to help you manage that change, offer transition programs when you join the university. So you'll have your general inductions. That's like when you go to freshers and you meet your course tutors and you start to meet your classmates and you start to get that kind of feel for it. But also there can be some supportive transitions. So, for example, we do the Step U Law one, which is a quick start on how to use your university emails, because we communicate this way by a lot. How to get the My U Law app to download, how to use our Digital Skills Academy, which I highly recommend. It's where you can rate your kind of digital skills, and it will give you small modules that you can complete if you need to work on that to make sure that you're fully university level study ready. So there's lots of tools and things available for you. So have a look about what it is that you need to make sure that your transition to university is what you need it to be.
So Jen, you kind of touched upon hidden disabilities earlier on, and we're aware of some of these sort of being, them being the neuro disabilities, but what other hidden disabilities are there? Is Crohn's one, for example, Crohn's disease, and how do people define whether they have a hidden disability or not?
Yes, that's a really good question. So to directly onto Crohn's, yes, it would be. So because it would impact on your day-to-day environment for more than 12 months, that's something that would be covered. But thinking about more broadly, you're looking at medical conditions as well. So it could be chronic fatigue, could have sickle cell, and it's also all right if you start the university and you think, okay, my condition's really well managed, I'm feeling really good at the moment, but sometimes that changes during the course. Some conditions tend to go up and down, they're more peak and trough, and while you might be kind of really plateauing and doing amazingly, if you have the type of condition that could fluctuate or change, do let us know, because we can do things like adjust coursework extension deadlines, for example. If we know you have a condition that goes up and down frequently, rather than waiting for that to happen while you have an assignment due, we can already just put that in place and say, well, that's fine, we know that might happen, so you don't have to worry about it. And it also saves you having to go to the doctor and get medical evidence for something that you already know you have. So that can be quite useful. But we also cover other hidden disabilities like mental health conditions, so anxiety and depression, more complex mental health conditions like bipolar, and also emotional unstable personality disorders. So anything, I wouldn't say anything that you go to your doctor about, because that's a bit broad, but anything you go to your doctor about a lot over a long period of time, and you're likely to always have that condition. Again, even if it's going really well for you, do just let us know, because it means that should that change during your time with us, and 3 years is a long time, hopefully nothing will happen, but if it does, it means that we'll be ready to spring into action and support you so that it doesn't impact on your studies too much. But yeah, so if it's something that you go to see your doctor about regularly, or it's impacting on you on a day-to-day basis, that's exactly the sort of thing that you can come and have a chat with us about. And then we'll just understand a little bit more about how that's impacting on you. And then we can set you up with, we remember it was a ULIP that sounds like a tulip, to make sure that your adjustments are all recorded. And then you can just go about your day-to-day enjoyment of your studies. But should anything happen, we are here as a backstop, always ready to support you.
So Jen, have you seen any areas of improvement over the last few years that are standouts to you at all that you'd like to share?
Yes, actually, we've been very lucky. The area of disability inclusion has really developed over the last, I'd say, 3 years, and a number of very useful sector-wide report that has been done in consultation with students who are currently students, to make sure that the recommendations are what students actually need and want. So the first one is the Arriving at Thriving report, which was written by Policy Connect, and it's an absolutely amazing document highlighting the whole student journey and recommendations for the university's Office for Students and Disabled Students Allowance, to make sure that that journey is much more joined up for students and more supportive. It's something that I'm working on at the moment, is implementing an action plan across the university to make sure that we're really reflecting on and considering those recommendations and moving forward with quite a lot of projects to ensure that students have the best possible experience with us. There's also been recently the release of the Mental Health Charter, which is very well researched and is very informed by student voice. And universities across the country at the moment are starting work on moving towards gaining Charter Award. And by doing so, it's improving and highlighting awareness across the sector about ensuring that student mental health remains a priority for all institutions. So I think that's a really positive document. And then finally, there's the joint project with the Department for Education and Department of Work and Pensions. There is going to be a new disability passport, which is linked to the individual, and it follows their journey through school, through university if they go there, and then into the workplace, and then towards adult social care as you approach retirement. I appreciate that might feel some time away, but the aim is that it's a supportive document that follows you. It's voluntary at the moment through institutions to make sure that you get the support that you need without having to do all the administrative burden that we talked about earlier. Filling in the forms for disabled students allowance can take quite a long time, and it can seem quite daunting. But what this passport will do is you'll only need to provide that medical evidence the one time. You'll have your diagnosis, and then it becomes an official document that follows you throughout the course of your life, which significantly reduces all of the extra paperwork that we have to do as disabled people. It's just part of how we have to do things. So it's really nice to see that that's going to be hugely reduced for us, and we're not going to feel like we have to do so much administration. And I think that that's going to be a real game changer, not just at universities, but in the workplace as well, moving kind of throughout your life into the next section. So I'm really happy to see that movement across the sector. And specifically at ULaw, we've got always a number of initiatives happening, but most recently we've signed up and had all of our ULaw owned sites visited by Access Able, and what they do is they look at the accessibility of buildings, but also specific teaching rooms, for example, or specific shared spaces like libraries or common areas where students may be socialising, and it means that you'll be able to go to their website, look up the University of Law, look up the room you're due to be in, and you'll have all of that accessibility information at your fingertips, which is very useful for sort of planning visits and things like that. It's also accompanied with images, so you can have a look and see where you're going to be going. So it can be really good for planning. We're really happy to be part of that scheme. We're also conducting an accessibility review of our virtual learning environment and our website and our teaching materials to make sure that they are as accessible as possible for all students, and just to build that into the heart of what we do, so that all students have really good access to good content in a way that suits them. So, for example, we have a feature on Elite, which is our virtual learning environment, where you can download some of the course materials in a way that it will read it out to you as an audio file, like Sophie mentioned, or it can change the colour of the background. You can have it into what's called a B-liner, which does a gradient on the background. You can read it with Immersive Reader, but also it can go into an EPUB, so like a Kindle style book, and you can use it on Audible, or you can read it on your Kindle. So just really expanding the different ways in which students can access their course material, which I think is a really good move. And most recently, there's been emerging reports around increased need for students with ADHD. So I recently developed a program to support students with ADHD who have a diagnosis, but also those who identify with having ADHD, but have yet to go down the diagnostic route for a variety of reasons, including the length of wait lists. So that's a coaching program that runs, if you're a September starter, in November. If you're a January starter, that runs in March. So perhaps I will see some of you there. So there's sort of broader projects happening across institutions in the sector generally, also bigger projects happening ULaw, but also really specific projects that help kind of smaller groups of students. So I'd be really happy to see some of you at that programme. But yeah, what I'm seeing across the sector is a positive move towards making disability inclusion business as usual. I imagine an inclusive utopia one day where this will just be how everybody does business. It won't be something that we need to think about in retrospect. It will just be that we're all included all the time.
That's great, Jen. And I think two of those projects that really sort of stand out to me that are, accessible for everybody, it doesn't matter what your disability are, is that disability passport. I think that is a fab idea. I know that I would have absolutely loved this. And we've spoken about this before, Jen, about my journey when as I say, finding out I was dyslexic, and as I say, all the branches on that tree as well. But finding out just before I joined college and then being told I needed to go through the whole test once again, and the sort of the stress that that gave me, as we said, Jen, when we were talking, it was mad. But whereas if I had this passport, I wouldn't have had to have gone through that conversation. I wouldn't have had to make it so public that I was having another test done or anything like that, because I think that also is something that we sometimes forget or don't always consider, is the emotional sort of toll that it can have on us as well. When it's not only sort of going through the tests multiple times, but also getting a diagnosis that can be quite emotionally hard on us when we first get that. So I think the passport sounds like an absolutely brilliant idea, and so wonderful to hear that we're coming along. And I think Access Able as well is a fab one for everybody. You don't have to be someone who has a disability to benefit from this. It also works for people that are carers, to sort of pre-plan a journey. For example, if you're going to a new town for the first time and you want to see what restaurant is sort of inclusive or accessible for whatever disability that you may be attending with, it's a really, really good platform. And again, another great one for people that have maybe been recently diagnosed with a disability. It just takes that worry out of situations that you may have never had to consider before. So I think for me, they are two really great jump out projects. that are great for anyone and everyone, whether you identify as having a disability or not.
Yeah, I really like Access-able as well. It's kind of like Google Maps. Like if you're going somewhere new, you always look at Google Maps to figure out where you're going so you don't get lost. It's like Google Maps, but for inside buildings. It's great.
Exactly
People
that.
want to know where they're going. It's helpful.
It's so true. And sometimes just having that visual representation is so much easier to follow, and takes the worry out of which way's left, which way's right. Am I going up these stairs? What's the sign say, etc. like that. So no, I completely agree. Anything that's visual is always helpful, I think.
Yes, indeed.
So no, that's perfect. And then just one other point that I just wanted to bring up was about Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So this is just around the corner. It's on Thursday, the 18th of May, and it is their 12th Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So the purpose of this day is to get people talking, as they say on their website, to get people talking and thinking and learning about digital access and inclusion, and that there is more than 1 billion people with disabilities or impairments. Does this surprise us, and is there more that we should be shouting about with this day? Should we be aware of this day a lot more than what we are?
Yes, absolutely. I think that everybody should be aware of this because as whether you're somebody who, like me, has always had a disability, or it's something that you acquire later in life through age, you might find your ability to interact with the digital world being limited because it's not accessible for everyone. So I give the example that I like things to be in a color contrast because I find the really high contrast very difficult. So if I'm looking at a website that isn't contrasted properly, it makes it very difficult for me to engage with that. And often I'll just pick something else if I have the availability to do that. But what GAAD highlights is that we actually need to be thinking about, if we're creating services and pages for people to use, are we creating it for the people who use it, or are we doing it the easiest possible way for us to develop it? And it's a broad question globally that needs to be done. And I always think about, I've got my dad a new phone with a big screen because he's finding it increasingly difficult to touch the buttons because he has arthritis. And again, that's something that's happened much later in life. But by making buttons not properly linked, or having kind of the good visual representation, or the ability to sort of enlarge on the screen, it makes it difficult for people to engage. And our world is becoming increasingly digital. So I think the idea of a global digital accessibility day is very, very important to highlight that this is something that is relevant for everyone. It's not just something that's part of the disabled community. It's anyone who uses digital platforms. It needs to be designed for users. And I think that that's what the 12th anniversary is promoting this year. So I'm really happy to hear that we're involved with supporting that.
Well, that concludes today's podcast. Thank you, Jen and Cara, for sharing your thoughts, experience and tips. And thank you at home for listening. And until next time, goodbye.